When I was 17, I worked at Pizza Hut as a driver. I lived in the middle of bumfuck Kansas, and all the towns around where I lived were a good 10 to 15 miles apart from each other. I had gotten a job at Pizza Hut since they were desperate for employees and I needed a new job. The pay was not very good, but I was still in high school, so it didn't really matter. This took place back at the beginning of 2022. The one I worked at had us delivering in a 25-mile radius, which looking back is absolutely crazy. Because for reference, most of the time you deliver in a 5 to 10 mile radius of the store. But since this was the only Pizza Hut pretty much in the area, we had more delivery responsibility. I was one of 3 drivers, so I was always scheduled and always working long shifts. This included closing hour shifts, which meant I had to stay at the store and take all the late night deliveries, which I hated doing. Not necessarily because I was scared, but just because it was annoying, and a lot of the time, late night deliveries don't tip. This took place on a cold Thursday night, where I was the only driver at the store and only the cook and my manager were still there. It had been extremely slow, and I was wanting my manager to let me go home early, since I had school the next day and it was 10 p.m. I hadn't taken a delivery in over an hour, so I was doing nothing, but it wouldn't let me use my phone. Right when I was about to ask to leave, the phone rang and ruined any chances of that happening. I never answered the phone because I couldn't muster the strength to put on that BS happy customer service voice that they made us do, so my manager answered. It took around 15 minutes for the order to be ready. I wanted to get this done as quickly as possible, so I was driving way over the speed limit. I had never been to this address before, and eventually I had to get off of the paved roads onto the gravel roads. I had to take a couple of turns and I ended up at a shitty trailer home. There were no cars parked outside and no lights on, so at first, I thought it had possibly been a prank call. I called my manager and told her, and she said I should still go knock and see if anyone's home. I asked her how old the caller sounded, and she said she couldn't tell because the caller had been talking extremely low and almost unintelligible. This made me almost certain it was a prank call and a waste of time. I decided I'd give the customer a call since I had his number on the receipt. I called and it went straight to the voicemail, and I became annoyed. I turned off the car, got out, and I walked towards the trailer. It was cloudy and cold, so I had to use my phone's flash to even see where I was going. I was talking shit about the customer to myself, and I stopped when I thought I heard something. I stopped walking to hear a little bit better, and it sounded like someone else's footsteps. I was on edge now because I'm a skinny guy. I'm 6'3", but I'm only 140 pounds, so I'd be an easy target if someone wanted to rob me. I didn't have a weapon or anything on me either to defend myself, so I yelled out, "Is anyone out there? I have your pizza." But no response. I continued walking to the door and I got to the steps and knocked. I again yelled, "I'm the pizza guy." And again, no response. I couldn't just leave the pizza at the door since it was a cash payment, and I had around $45 worth of food. I knocked again, this time way louder, and I heard fast steps coming from around the trailer. I said, "I have your pizza." I shined my flash at the noise. I was met with a terrifying sight. A man was charging at me and he was wearing an apron covered with stains and a creepy baby mask. I yelled, "What the hell?" and right as he was about to grab me, I swung the bag with a soda and it connected with his head and dropped him, and the soda spilled everywhere. The man was stumbling back up to his feet, so I kicked him in the stomach and made him fall back down. I took the pizza boxes and I slammed them on his head and made a dash to my car. I got in and I locked the doors immediately, which I'm glad I did, because the man was soon right at my door trying to open it and punching at my window. I put the keys in the ignition and reversed while the man was still kicking at my car. Once I was able to get back on the roads, I was easily going 80, and I called my manager to tell her what happened. She freaked out, but she told me not to call the cops. But I hung up and ignored her, and I called 911. I told them what happened and how my manager said not to call. By the time I got back to the Pizza Hut, 2 cops were parked outside, and I rushed inside to see them talking to my manager. She gave me a dirty look, but I didn't care. It wasn't like I was still going to be working there. They asked me to explain the situation again, so I did. They said they would go over there and check it out. I asked if they could trace the call since we had the man's number, and they said they were working on it. They also said they would send some officers to the address. I wanted answers really bad, so I asked if I could come wait at the police station. And they said sure. I had my manager clock me out and give me my mileage and tips, then I quit on the spot. I went to the police station and waited. I decided I'd just skip school the next day since it was too close to midnight and I still wasn't home. After about an hour of waiting, the 2 officers I spoke to came in and they said they went to the trailer and no one lived there. And then they showed me a broken Android phone and they said that's where the call came from. I asked if there was anything else that they could do to find the man and they said they would check for fingerprints, and I went home. I told my parents what happened and they let me stay home from school, but I never heard back from the police, so I guess they weren't able to find that creep. This is still the scariest thing to ever happen to me, and I have no idea if that man just wanted to rob me or if he had some more sinister motives. This happened right before my 16th birthday. I needed to go to the DMV to get a photo taken for my ID, since I'd be turning 18 in a couple of years. If you've been to these kinds of places, you'd know the wait can be very time-consuming, so I wasn't looking forward to going, especially knowing that the DMV was in a really bad and crime-infested neighborhood. Unfortunately for me, that was the DMV that was the most local. The time came and it was time for me to start heading that way. The wait was incredibly boring as expected. However, about an hour after I got there, an announcement came over the loudspeaker for the faculty to come talk in a room. We didn't know what was going on until they came back a few minutes later and said the place was closed. But those waiting in line could continue waiting. I didn't know what could have happened, but I didn't have to wonder too long because my mom told me she overheard a janitor talking to some lady about a shooting which occurred around the corner. Well, I got done with what I needed to get done and we headed out. I then found out that the shooting was actually 2 stores down and my mother's vehicle was covered in crime scene tape. A cop who was outside the store the shooting was in saw me wearing a black jacket with the hood on. Keep in mind this was a very cold and rainy day, so I wasn't wearing it to look gangster. The cop asks me suspiciously what I'm doing in the area. My city has a very corrupt police force, by the way, and my mom had to tell the cop I was at the DMV getting my photo ID taken. My mom had to show proof of that to the officer so he wouldn't think we were lying. I'm grateful my mom was there to back me up, otherwise I don't know what I had done. I've been back to that DMV since, but my body goes numb every time I have to go back there out of anxiety. Lesson learned. Don't walk around a shady neighborhood in a black jacket and hood, even if the weather is bad. This experience happened at my uncle's house back in 2001. A little backstory to give more clarity about my experience. I grew up in San Francisco, and after I graduated high school, I decided to move to a small town where my dad's family lives. This town was 3 hours south of San Francisco and had a population of 70,000. It was a nice change to the big city life I had for 14 years prior. When I finally moved, I went over to my uncle's house and asked if I could speak to him briefly. He then motioned for us to come toward the little table next to the kitchen to sit down and talk. I asked him if I could live with him and Auntie for a while, as I attended community college, adding that I didn't like living alone in a new town that I just moved to. He replied, "I think that'll be fine." I told him how thankful I was of that, and that if he needed me to help out in anything around the house, just let me know. I then left to go get my things, and in a few hours I came back and only brought with me what I needed. Clothes, my books, toothbrush, and some CDs. Almost immediately, I felt a vibe that someone else was in the home. But knowing that it was only me and my uncle at the time, this freaked me out. I compared this to the feeling of when you go to a friend's house for a party, and there are people walking around. It wasn't necessarily a bad feeling, but it got my attention. One day I saw my uncle doing beadwork at the table, listening to a radio talk show. I asked if I could sit with him and listen, and he said, "Sure, come and sit." I told him that I wanted to tell him something I experienced when I moved into his house on the first day, and I added that I hoped he didn't think I was weird. He said, "Go ahead, tell me." I told him my feeling of there being a vibe of other people in the house, and there was only me and him in the home at the time when I moved in. He said, "You know, I'll tell you this, all the years that I've lived here, I've had some experiences that I couldn't explain, and they didn't scare me much, but I noticed them." I replied, "Tell me one thing that happened, please." And he said, "One night I was watching the History Channel, and I was by myself in the house. It was around 9 p.m., and your auntie wasn't home yet from her shift at the hospital. I was in my recliner, and behind me in the kitchen, I heard the drawers and cabinets open. I went to turn on the kitchen lights, and a few of the drawers and cabinets were opened out all the way. Needless to say, I was scared, so I believe you. I don't think you are weird or anything. So a few months later, I had my own experience. When my experience happened, I was the only one in the home, as my uncle and auntie were out for a while. My cousin, which is obviously my uncle's daughter, was away attending her first year at university, so I was given her room by my uncle when I moved in. I was walking down the hallway leading to her room one night, and it was pitch black as it usually is. This being my uncle's house, it was far out in the country, in the last house on the block next to a field. There were also barely any streetlights to shine inward towards the home. I turned to the right down the hallway leading into my new room. By this time, I had grown used to walking to the center of the room to pull a long string tied to the ceiling fan to turn on the light bulb. I was feeling around in the dark for the string, and then suddenly, I saw something darker than my pitch black room come toward me. When this thing came toward me, it started to push me out of my room, and I wasn't able to see out of my left eye, which was even stranger. Of course, initially I thought it was a person, but while it was pushing me, I knew it wasn't human, because it didn't have the characteristics of what a human's arms, hands, and body feel like. What would be this thing's arms and hands felt much bigger, and where the fingers would be, I would compare it to something like an animal's paws, but without the nails and claws. Additionally, I felt this thing go through me during the time it was pushing me. After the pushing stopped, I was finally able to see out of my left eye again. I then found myself completely outside of my room in front of the bathroom door. I just couldn't believe it. I was shocked and I didn't understand what just happened. When I looked at how far I was pushed out of the room from where my ceiling fan was to where I found myself, it was a total distance of about 8 feet, at least. I had so many thoughts going through my head, like, this is impossible. What in the world just happened, and what was that? Whenever I look back on this experience, it is still one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. And I've thought about all the possibilities of what kind of creature or being it was. The best explanation I came up with is, because this thing was able to be solid and at the same time have the ability to pass through me, it made me think it was some kind of apparition, or possibly an alternate dimensional being. If someone out there has ideas on what kind of being I encountered, you can please share your thoughts. When I did research on the previous families and the history of the house, I found out that there was a woman that lived there until old age, but there wasn't anything else I was able to find out. Alright, here we go. So nearly a year ago now, on Christmas, I was at my dad's with some of my siblings. We celebrated Christmas, and then after dinner, my dad headed off to be with his girlfriend at her apartment. Left in the house was my uncle, my 16-year-old older brother, and me who was 15, with the youngest being a toddler. I woke up early the next morning, the day after Christmas, and I sat on the floor beside an outlet on my tablet. Everyone else was still sleeping, and then I heard banging on the back door. I thought it was my dad coming back, but the banging got louder and it went on for way too long. For lack of a better term, I disassociated, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like I couldn't move until I heard the back door break. I'd been paranoid about home invasions due to our area in the city before, but I had no idea what to do and I just stood there in shock. I put down my tablet and I picked up a nearby flashlight. When the back door had given out, I heard him quickly go through the downstairs, stomp up the stairs, and then he was right outside the door of the room I was in. The man opened the door, turned left, and then turned right. When he saw me sitting on the floor beside the outlet less than 3 feet away from him, he was taller than my dad and wore completely black and a ski mask. He held a big rusty-ish crowbar that had a blue handle. He was wide and looked on the older side. I took a small breath and screamed louder than I ever have, and I held it for at least 20 seconds. Once I screamed, he screamed a bit too, and then ran downstairs and out of the house. I went to the top of the staircase after he was already down them, and out the hallway, and I yelled, "Please leave," as loud as I had screamed less than a second before. Looking back, asking a house invader to leave is useless, because he was already leaving, and also because he broke in, but I wasn't thinking the best. My screaming woke up my uncle and my older brother. Also, I wasn't wearing any pants, so I put pants on quicker than I ever have, while telling my older brother what just happened, as he was half awake and confused. I ran downstairs and my uncle had just come from his room into the basement. I quickly told him someone had broken in and left after I screamed. He already had a knife and told me to grab one too. I did, and after making sure the robber had left the house and checking quickly on the toddler, who was somehow still sleeping, my uncle told me to guard the back door and stab anyone who comes through while he checked the area outside the neighborhood to see if the robber was gone or where he went. I held the knife and stood beside the broken back door, knowing if someone came back I couldn't do anything, as I have never been in a fight before, and I was just a child holding a kitchen knife. So I just held the knife in hopes that they wouldn't come back, and they didn't. My uncle came back and said that they must have had a driver, since there was no way he could get away that fast on foot. None of us had phones, so I used my tablet to text my dad over Instagram to tell him what happened. We explained what happened, and when Dad was 10 minutes away via car, he hung up. While we all sat and waited for my dad, we talked and realized this was likely all planned. The invader came in when there was no car in the driveway, and after entering, he ran directly upstairs, ignoring the new Christmas presents, an alcohol collection, and even 2 gaming consoles smack dab in the middle of the living room that he ran past. He went directly to my dad's room, where me and my older brother were. My dad collects valuable shoes and has some expensive watches he keeps in his closet. And only someone that's friends with my dad, who had been in the house before, could have done it, and he knew the right place to go. When my dad came back, he asked me over and over about how the intruder looked, and I told him again and again while he and my uncle tried to think of which friend it could have been. I was the only one who saw the guy, and he had been less than 3 feet away from me. I was in direct physical danger from some stranger I'd never met. We didn't call the cops, as the police in our area and city are known for being more than unhelpful. As Christmas is getting closer again, I'm worried about being there around the same time the person broke in. I've had a harder time sleeping, and I've been more paranoid. I understand I was and am very, very lucky that I wasn't hurt, and all we got was a broken back door, but I honestly hate the person who broke in. So for context, I moved into my new house about a year or 2 ago. I had lived in the area for a year before, but we were evicted due to the owners of our old house wanting to move in. I'm a young female still living with my family, which makes this story even more weird and pedo-y. When you look out my window, you see my fence and then a house. The first encounter I had with this man was late at night. It was with some friends while all of our parents were out at a party. I will say that me and my friends are old enough to be left at home alone. We were responsible. We were just relaxing in my room with no light or music on. We had turned the TV off when we were alone. At one point, we heard my dog start barking for a good 10 minutes. We passed this off because she barks at absolutely everything. I'm talking like birds on the power line or a bug on the front porch. Literally anything that moves. We started hearing weirder noises like crunching circling the perimeter of my room and scratching on the walls. I kid you not, the moment we start getting scared, the loudest bangs I've ever heard start pounding on my glass sliding door. Me and the 3 others run out of my room to go look at what in the world could be making this much noise. We were greeted by an aggressive dog. This dog was up on the glass pounding on the door. My dog was really scared, and she usually doesn't do this, but she backed away behind me into my room with all of her fur up. Then we see it. A man dressed in all black standing at the door. We were all standing perfectly still, but I guess my friend's flight response went off, and just as he jumped to lock the door, the man reached for it too. My friend yelled, "What are you doing here? Who are you?" And he responded with a simple, "I don't know," and walked off with his dog who was on a leash. When our parents got back, we told them about him. They asked us why we didn't call them. Truthfully, I know we should have, but I didn't want to ruin my mom's birthday party. I've learned from this. 2 days later, my mom confronted our neighbor who was mowing the lawn. He said that it was in fact him and that his dog had to run into our gate, and he got the dog back. He said he meant to come and talk to her earlier about it, but he didn't. I thought it was a normal story until I thought back to that night. The gate that this dog supposedly ran through has a tough clasp that was shut on that night. We have it there so our dog can't get out and so nothing can come in, but you can open it by hand. Meaning that this man opened the gate and let himself and his dog in. My theory is that he heard the music stop and didn't see lights from the house, so he decided that he was going to come in. I don't know, rob us or creep on us. The noises we heard must have been him, scaling the perimeter of my room for 10 minutes before attempting to enter. We filed the police report and nothing happened for a few months, until one night. I was in bed, almost asleep, but still getting comfy. I sat up to rearrange my pillows and turned around so I could properly make it comfy when I saw a face outside my window staring back at me. Whoever it was wearing a black face covering, and I texted my mom and froze. I heard moving and then my mom came and checked it out. Nothing there. This wasn't just my imagination, as my neighbor's lights are visible from the crack in my curtain, but the face was covering a majority of the light. Ever since then, I have noticed them watching. I don't know what to do.